You know what the cruelest thing is? It is not betrayal. It is becoming the sponsor of the very betrayal itself. I used to think I was an ordinary husband, teaching classes, paying bills, loving my wife properly, until one night when Milwaukee froze the entire city and froze my heart with it. I looked through the camera on my laptop screen. Room number 17, Maple Lodge Motel. The door opened. My wife threw herself into the arms of a strange man, with a smile I had not seen again in 8 years of marriage. They disappeared behind the door of number 17 of that motel, and I knew exactly what they did inside. When the truth is dirty enough, silence becomes the cleanest weapon. That night, I chose silence. Not to forgive, but to prepare justice. Stay until the end. You will understand why I say that. Thank you, truly thank you, for taking the time for this story. Among the countless things out there, the fact that you stopped and listened to the journey of a silent man is something I never take lightly. If you believe that every truth will one day be seen, leave as a reminder that you still stand on the side of the light. And if you want to continue walking with me through stories where silence becomes justice, where truth finally defeats lies, subscribe to the channel, so that each day I have the chance to send you another journey, a journey of those who seem the weakest, but are actually the strongest. Thank you for being here. April in Chicago smells like wet metal and freshly polished wood. The rain had just stopped. The city looked as if wiped through a thin sheet of glass. Cargo ships hummed along the river, their deck lights smearing into long streaks across the full-height windows of the apartment. I set the Pinot bottle on the table, the cork giving a soft pop like a deep breath after a long day. Lydia placed 2 white porcelain plates, each with 3 slices of seared salmon and a small corner of rocket salad with olive oil and pink pepper. Everything was the same taste, the same habits repeated for years, except for her silence tonight, thick like a thin layer of ice covering the flowing river. I poured the wine, pushed the glass toward her. Lydia did not look at me. Her eyes caught the yellow lights reflected on the glass. The tip of her high heel tapped the steel table bar. A tiny ting. Years of teaching told me this. Some sounds quieter than words carry meanings larger than a long letter. She held the knife, removed the crispy skin of the salmon, and placed it at the edge of the plate as if she wanted to clear a private space on a plate already wide enough. Then she set the knife down, her hands interlocked, her thumb brushing the edge of her nail. I talked to a lawyer. I want a divorce. I did not ask why. Questions like that usually seek only polite lies. I set the wineglass down and looked at her. Her face was calm, like someone who had just read a verdict already signed. And I understand, I said. And I truly understood. Not the answer, but the gestures, the long calls these past 3 weeks, the weekends of retreats to find herself, the delivered packages with brand labels she never cared about before. Something in her had changed, not her heart, but her moral compass. The terms, she said, nodding toward her handbag as if there was a talking envelope inside. 80% of the marital assets. This apartment was transferred fully to my name, and 6 years of support. I nodded, just enough to acknowledge a sound that had reached my ear. Lydia leaned back, touching up her newly dyed hair. You're just a teacher. I can't hang my whole life on a dead salary chart. The words fell onto the table, soft as ash, but burning hot. I didn't look at the salmon anymore. I looked through the glass where the wind stroked cold droplets on the river's surface. And in that moment, I saw myself clearly. A 41-year-old man buried alive beneath the success of his own kindness. I didn't react. Years of teaching taught me that anger is a terrible curriculum. Do you want respect, or do you want to win? I asked, slow and steady, like solving an equation with too many variables. Lydia laughed softly, her lips curving with practiced skill. In real life, she said, those 2 things are usually the same. I opened the drawer and took out the silver Parker pen my father left me, the only thing left from the man who taught me that silence is also a form of power. On its barrel were 4 engraved words, truth in silence. I placed the pen at the edge of the table, right beside her wine glass. Which lawyer did you talk to? I asked. Ellen Strauss, she answered, looking out the window where a crane's red light hung like a floating ember. She told me not to let you drag this out with paperwork. Go straight to the terms. I don't want a war. I want liberation. Liberation from what? From a man not rich enough, or from your own conscience? I said. Lydia smirked. From the feeling of having to justify every decision to someone who lives by numbers and charts, she replied, her voice not louder but half a degree colder. You measure even emotions. I don't want to live with another scale. I looked at her hands, hands that once held mine before my first lecture, once wiped sweat from my forehead on a tense night, now clasped tight as if hiding a secret, dirty enough to make her tremble. And us? I asked. And evenings like this, when the city has just been washed clean by rain and the salmon is cooked just right? We've talked about that. Don't romanticize failure. I lifted the pen, turned it once, hearing the faint spring inside, the sound of a verdict preparing to be read. I remembered my father placing this pen in my hand the day I received my first teaching appointment. He said, "You'll learn that sometimes the truth doesn't need a voice. It needs a signature at the right moment." I'll review the terms, I said, and I'll respond in writing. Lydia tilted her head, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had secured the scene. Don't turn this into a lecture. I'm not your student, and you're no longer the man I admired. I poured more wine into her glass. She didn't drink. Outside, a train horn echoed long, an ancient sound slowing everything in the room by a beat. I thought of my students, their essays on ethics in capital markets that I still underlined in green ink, the questions about the boundary between freedom and responsibility I still posed before every exam. The irony that I taught them honesty while the person beside me had enrolled in a masterclass of betrayal. Adrian, Lydia said, and for the first time that evening she looked straight at me. Don't turn this into your performance. I've chosen. I don't want arguments. Neither do I said. I'm not arguing. I just want everything on the table, like these 2 salmon plates. Lydia glanced down. Her salmon was still mostly untouched. On the plate, the olive oil glistened like a thin streak of rain. I'll send the email, she said, standing up and picking up her bag. And Adrian, she paused at the doorway, don't bring Marcus into this. I don't want family matters to repeat the past. The door closed behind her with the soft inhale of a rubber seal, a closing of an old world. I stayed seated, listening to the city shift, steel wheels rolling on damp tracks, the smell of wet wood slipping through the door crack like an unsigned letter. I wiped the knife, cleared the plates, washed the glasses, and opened the window to let the cold air in. Then I returned to the table, aligned the Parker pen, and opened my laptop. 3 new emails. 2 were school notifications, the last from a Lydia reveevanmark.co. Subject, preliminary divorce terms.pif. I touched the trackpad. A small window popped up. CC Ellen.Strauss's CC Marcus.Forsyth. I froze at that very moment when the name Marcus Forsyth dropped like a pebble onto a smooth surface, sending rings outward. My thumb unconsciously rubbed the word silence engraved on the pen barrel. Outside, a container ship passed, its lights slicing the darkness like a blade. I clicked open the file. After Lydia left and the apartment door closed, with the faint inhale of the rubber seal, the room fell into a kind of silence that was no longer neutral. It was the silence of something that had ended. And in that quiet, old memories began to flood in as if the room was not wide enough to keep me standing in the present. I walked to the wooden cabinet beneath the bookshelf, the cabinet that, every time I opened it, felt like it pulled me back years. The door clicked lightly. the scent of old wood mixed with warm paper drifting out, carrying me back to the only thing my father left. A savings book with a worn brown leather cover, the top right corner still holding the familiar slanted words, Forsyth Family Fund, to save for the right thing. Just touching the edge of the cover brought back every memory of the year my father died, 2014. Back then I was still a young lecturer, watching my father's breathing slow in a hospital room far too bright and far too cold for a man who had lived his life with chalk and a blackboard. When I received that book, I never thought it would become the foundation of my life afterward. But it led me to the West Loop apartment in 2019, where there was a moment I never forgot. When I signed the contract to buy the home, Marcus, my older brother, stood leaning against the doorframe, holding a cup of hot coffee. His eyes did not look like someone sharing joy, but like someone assessing a scene. "You used all of Dad's fund?" I said. "It was the fund he left for me." He set the cup on the new kitchen counter, his voice lowering like a blade pressing into wood grain. "A home can disappear too. All it takes is one careless signature." At the time, I thought he was lecturing me. But now, after the night Lydia demanded a divorce, I realized he saw what I refused to look at. I set the savings book on the table, and at that moment, another layer of memory pulled me even farther back, to when the two of us still shared one study desk, 2 yellow lamps, and a father who always believed that kindness is the only thing that never loses. Marcus and I had always been different. He sharp, me soft. He liked to argue, I liked to listen. As adults, he chose law, the path of confrontation and evidence. I chose teaching, the path of patience and ethics. The distance between us did not appear suddenly. It widened like a crack in concrete, starting from the days he asked me, "Can ideals pay bills?" And I laughed, saying nothing. We were both right, and both are lonely. Those memories led me to a beautiful image of the past, Lydia, in my classroom in 2015. I still remember that afternoon, weak sunlight slipping through the tall windows, and she stood among the students like a small exclamation mark, bright and noticeable. When I lectured on market honesty, she was the only one not checking the time. After class, she waited in the hallway and asked, "Do you believe honesty still has a business place?" I replied, "If I don't, what else do I have left to teach?" She laughed, a long smile soft enough to smooth every sharp edge of that day. We loved, fast, deep. We got married in 2017. The ceremony by Lake Michigan had wine so strong her veil twisted around her shoulders like a bird's wing. Marcus raised his glass with a toast that I now realized carried more than one layer of meaning. "To my little brother, may he keep his goodness longer than the term of a contract." The first years of marriage were calm, like clear water. Mornings I read the news, Lydia typed on her laptop. Evenings we watched movies, cooked, spoke of everything. Two people still believed the future was endless, until she said she wanted to develop herself. At first, I thought she meant earning a new certificate, but then she began joining self-empowerment retreats, returning with amethyst necklaces, unusual robes, and phrases scented more with self-help books than reality. "You can't love me if you don't invest in the better version of me." I thought she was joking. Then the retreat bill over $3,000 arrived. It was not a joke, and one day she said she needed my name on a small investment through Evan Mark Digital LLC. I signed, I trusted, and I did not ask. There are moments when people choose to believe not because it is right, but because the peace of that moment is too pleasant to break. Now the peace was broken, and it had shattered in a way that made me remember every piece. I returned to the table and opened my laptop. The screen's light made the room feel smaller. Just as I was about to reply to Lydia's divorce term email, a ping sounded. A new email. A strange sender, unknowntoprivatehost.co. Only one sentence, short and sharp, like someone flipping a knife to its sharpest edge. Your brother said you'll regret it if you keep ignoring me. I leaned back and took a long breath, not because I was afraid, but because I knew that from that second on, my silence was no longer the escape of a decent husband. It had become the weapon of a man stepping onto a real battlefield. After Lydia left and the apartment door closed with the faint inhale of the rubber seal, the room fell into a kind of silence that was no longer neutral. It was the silence of something that had ended, and in that quiet, old memories began to flood in as if the room was not wide enough to keep me standing in the present. I walked to the wooden cabinet beneath the bookshelf, the cabinet that, every time I opened it, felt like it pulled me back years. The door clicked lightly, the scent of old wood mixed with warm paper drifting out, carrying me back to the only thing my father left. A savings book with a worn brown leather cover, the top right corner still holding the familiar slanted words, Forsyth Family Fund, to save for the right thing. Just touching the edge of the cover brought back every memory of the year my father died, 2014. Back then, I was still a young lecturer, watching my father's breathing slow in a hospital room, far too bright and far too cold for a man who had lived his life with chalk and a blackboard. When I received that book, I never thought it would become the foundation of my life afterward. But it led me to the West Loop apartment in 2019, where there was a moment I never forgot. When I signed the contract to buy the home, Marcus, my older brother, stood leaning against the doorframe, holding a cup of hot coffee. His eyes did not look like someone sharing joy, but like someone assessing a scene. You used all of Dad's fund? I said. It was the fund he left for me. He set the cup on the new kitchen counter, his voice lowering like a blade pressing into wood grain. A home can disappear too. All it takes is one careless signature. At the time, I thought he was lecturing me. But now, after the night Lydia demanded a divorce, I realized he saw what I refused to look at. I set the savings book on the table, and at that moment, another layer of memory pulled me even farther back, to when the two of us still shared one study desk, 2 yellow lamps, and a father who always believed that kindness is the only thing that never loses. Marcus and I had always been different. He sharp, me soft. He liked to argue, I liked to listen. As adults, he chose law, the path of confrontation and evidence. I chose teaching, the path of patience and ethics. The distance between us did not appear suddenly. It widened like a crack in concrete, starting from the days he asked me, "Can ideals pay bills?" And I laughed, saying nothing. We were both right, and both are lonely. Those memories led me to a beautiful image of the past, Lydia, in my classroom in 2015. I still remember that afternoon, weak sunlight slipping through the tall windows, and she stood among the students like a small exclamation mark, bright and noticeable. When I lectured on market honesty, she was the only one not checking the time. After class, she waited in the hallway and asked, "Do you believe honesty still has a business place?" I replied, "If I don't, what else do I have left to teach?" She laughed, a long smile soft enough to smooth every sharp edge of that day. We loved, fast, deep. We got married in 2017. The ceremony by Lake Michigan had winds so strong, her veil twisted around her shoulders like a bird's wing. Marcus raised his glass with a toast that I now realized carried more than one layer of meaning. To my little brother, may he keep his goodness longer than the term of a contract. The first years of marriage were calm, like clear water. Mornings I read the news. Lydia typed on her laptop. Evenings we watched movies, cooked, spoke of everything. 2 people still believed the future was endless, until she said she wanted to develop herself. At first I thought she meant earning a new certificate, but then she began joining self-empowerment retreats, returning with amethyst necklaces, unusual robes, and phrases scented more with self-help books than reality. You can't love me if you don't invest in the better version of me. I thought she was joking. Then the retreat bill over $3,000 arrived. It was not a joke. And one day she said she needed my name on a small investment through Evanmark Digital LLC. I signed, I trusted, and I did not ask. There are moments when people choose to believe, not because it is right, but because the peace of that moment is too pleasant to break. Now the peace was broken, and it had shattered in a way that made me remember every piece. I returned to the table and opened my laptop. The screen's light made the room feel smaller. Just as I was about to reply to Lydia's divorce term email, a ping sounded. A new email. A strange sender. Unknown. privatehost.co. Only one sentence, short and sharp, like someone flipping a knife to its sharpest edge. Your brother said you'll regret it if you keep ignoring me. I leaned back and took a long breath, not because I was afraid, but because I knew that from that second on, my silence was no longer the escape of a decent husband. It had become the weapon of a man stepping onto a real battlefield. That night, Chicago was wet with rain. Long streaks of water on the apartment windows reflected the city lights like broken electrical circuits. I sat alone in the small office, the place that used to be our shared reading corner, now left with only the fan's hum and the cold drifting in through the window. At first I intended to open my laptop just to review this month's expenses, an old habit to keep life balanced. But in truth, I was searching for anything that could explain why Lydia had walked into last night with a divorce plan so polished it looked rehearsed dozens of times. When the screen lit up, I saw it, a recurring withdrawal that had never appeared before. $1,950 each time, appearing 8 times in 1 month, with a memo that simply read, Client Bonus. I stared at that number long enough to hope it would disappear, as if it were just a system error. But it stayed, steady, cold, indifferent. I asked myself silently, could she have... The question stuck in my throat before it became sound. I reached for my phone and called First Midwest Bank. The operator's voice on the other end sounded steady and tired, like someone relying on coffee but still not fully awake. First Midwest, how may I help you? I need to verify unusual transactions in the account under Adrian Forsyth. She asked me to verify my identity through each question. I answered them all, mechanically. Then I heard the rapid, decisive keystrokes. Finally, her voice dropped. Mr. Adrian, it appears your account is linked to a secondary account opened using Mrs. Lydia's SSN. My hand tightened around the phone. A secondary account? Created when? About 14 months ago, sir. By me? No. The system shows it was created by Mrs. Lydia. She used your SSN for verification. My back turned cold. One by one, Lydia's sudden retreats, her unexplained new purchases, the weeks she said she needed to find herself, all started fitting together like a flipped map. I opened every online statement, downloaded each one, and took screenshots of every transaction. I saved them into a new folder, Evidence Pack 01, Financial Irregularities. I printed a test copy and signed it with the silver Parker pen my father left me. The engraved words on its barrel gleamed cold under the light. Truth in silence. The truth lies in silence. It turned out silence was not weakness, as Lydia believed, but a way to see everything clearly. While checking the linked accounts section, I froze. There was a line I had never seen before. HELOC, Home Equity Line of Credit, $30,000. I shot up from the chair. A secondary loan had been drawn from the condo itself, and I had never signed anything. A HELOC can only be opened with the homeowner's signature. So where did that signature come from? Or worse, from whom? I asked myself in the quiet. Lydia, what have you done? My phone chimed with a new email. The ding echoed sharply through the dark room. Sender, Marcus Cole, my brother. Subject, meet me tomorrow morning. Don't say anything to her. I sat frozen. Marcus rarely spoke in commands, and the fact he wrote her, not Lydia, told me something much bigger was happening. Outside the window, Chicago rain fell harder, as if the city itself was warning me about a storm that wasn't on any weather report. The next morning, Chicago was colder than usual, not the biting cold of winter, but the chill of a city that had just gone through a night of rain, leaving the smell of damp asphalt and steam rising from the sidewalks. I walked along South Wabash, my hands still slightly shaking, not from the weather, but because Marcus's email from last night was still echoing in my head like metal tapping against stone. Meet me tomorrow morning. Don't say anything to her. A short message, no explanation, no greeting, no trace of the 6 years of silence between us. The small cafe in the Loop had changed a lot. They replaced the wooden sign with a minimalist neon board. They added rows of fake plants for people to take photos, and the espresso machine still roared the same way it had the last time Marcus and I argued here, about careers, about life, about choices both of us believed we were right about. Today, the one waiting for me was Marcus. Shorter haircut, dark gray suit, eyes sharp but tired. I pulled out the chair and sat down without speaking. He didn't speak either. Between us were 6 years folded into a few seconds of silence. Finally, Marcus set down his coffee cup. You got the email, right? I nodded. He leaned back, the morning light hitting his cheekbone in a way that made me remember the night of our father's funeral, the only night I had ever seen him cry. Lydia doesn't just want a divorce, Adrian. She wants to destroy you. I wasn't surprised, but hearing him say it sent another chill down my spine. Marcus didn't come alone. He tilted his head slightly in a signal. A woman appeared, black hair tied low, long camel coat, a fast but grounded stride. When she placed the document bag on the table, I saw the edge of an investigator's license peeking out. This is Clara Doyle, Marcus said. She helped me win the Bristol misuse of funds case in 2022. One of the sharpest people I've ever worked with. Clara extended her hand. I shook it. A firm, precise handshake. Nothing extra. I reviewed the data you sent last night, she said. There are serious problems in both the secondary account and the HELOC. I exhaled. I thought so too, but I don't know where to even start. Marcus slid a folder toward me. The first page was printed in bold. Forsyth Legal File, Divorce Protection Checklist. There were 8 major categories: bank statements, HELOC timeline, signature verification, digital transfers, card logs, retreat payments, communication records, evidence of dissipation. I looked at Marcus. When did you make this? Last night? In just one night? Adrian, I'm a lawyer. You're my brother. Those two things together let me do more than that. I fell silent. Some things people say are not meant to show skill, but to show they're still on your side, even after distance. Clara began analyzing. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. Those withdrawals of $1,950 each, 8 times a month. That's not personal spending. That's the withdrawal pattern of an under-the-table payment contract, usually used for marketing consultants or... She stopped, looked straight at me. Or for a lover. The feeling in my chest was a punch I didn't brace for. I gripped my coffee cup to stay steady. Marcus cut in. In Illinois, dissipation of assets is a weapon, if she used marital assets to support another relationship. The Cook County Court will not be forgiving. I nodded. For the first time since last night, I didn't feel completely alone. They began planning. Marcus said, Step 1, freeze all linked accounts. Step 2, request verification of the HELOC signature. Step 3, collect evidence of transfers connected to a third party. Step 4, prepare a proactive filing. Force her into a defensive position. Clara added, and Step 5, identify who received the money from the secondary account. She clicked open a new file. The file name made both Marcus and me stop. N. Reeve, payment trace. Who is this? I asked. Clara turned the screen slightly, her voice lowering. Noah Reeve, Claims to be the founder of a startup called Brightness Digital. A quick check shows the company doesn't exist. Just an empty website, domain registered at a photocopy shop in Ohio. And he receives money from Lydia's secondary account. The air in the cafe felt heavier. Marcus tightened his grip on his leather bag. Clara looked directly at me, not flinching. Adrian, I'm afraid Lydia isn't just having an affair. She may be involved in a gray zone money movement scheme, and using your name to legitimize it. The sentence hit the table like a block of metal. Outside the window, the train passed through the loop with a long, sharp screech that matched the feeling in my chest, chaotic, tight, and unmistakably clear that everything was only beginning. Clara closed her laptop, looked at Marcus, then at me. Tonight, I'll dig deeper into the transaction history. But before I go, she paused, her voice sharpened like a thin blade. I think we're about to find something worse than an affair. Milwaukee in the afternoon always has a kind of wind very different from Chicago, colder, wetter, and carrying the smell of a distant lake. Clara called me near 3 o'clock. Her voice was sharp, concise, without a hint of hesitation. I traced Lydia's retreat schedule. She's in Milwaukee. I'll update you as soon as something changes. I only managed to say, "Be careful," before the line went dead. Clara was not the type who liked to stretch conversations. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking one beat at a time. I tried to read my students' essays, but the words slid past without sticking. My mind held only one image. Lydia in her white coat, walking through the snow, and beside her a man I'd never met. A ping sounded, Clara's first message. Arrived, Mindhaven Retreat Center. Lydia's car is here. I opened Google Maps. Mindhaven sat on the edge of Milwaukee, a retreat center famous for its self-rediscovery workshops, expensive healing programs, and a list of speakers full of vague names I had never trusted. Clara sent another photo, the Mindhaven sign, white background, pale blue letters, snow lightly covering the stone benches in front of the reception. My stomach twisted, the encounter I never thought I would have to witness. Close to 4 o'clock, Clara sent another file of photos. Just seeing the first one made my hands go cold. Lydia walked out of the main building, her hair down on her shoulders, a long cream coat, the brown boots I bought her for Christmas in 2023. But what crushed me was the man waiting for her at the steps. Noah, the man Clara had traced last night, the owner of a fake startup, the one receiving money from the secondary account Lydia opened using my SSN. They stood closer than ordinary people stand. Lydia said something. Noah smiled slightly. And then Clara captured the exact moment. Lydia placed her hand on his arm, her finger gliding gently, the kind of gesture that only exists in intimacy. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and had to lean on the table to keep my balance. Not because of jealousy, but because humiliation and betrayal cut through me like a thin blade. Then the next message. She withdrew $4,000 in cash at the nearby ATM. Transaction reads, Private Workshop, MHC. I closed my eyes. $4,000 for a workshop or for something else? Something I had unknowingly paid for over the past year? The evidence began forming a structure. Clara sent the final file, a report titled, Observation 7, A Subject, Lydia Cole. Location, Mindhaven Retreat Center, Milwaukee. I opened it. The data was clear, sharp, cold, like a preliminary verdict. Lydia arrival time, 14:12. Person met, Noah Reeve. They left the main building, walked toward the cabins. Lydia handed a large envelope. Clara zoomed it clearly. Noah accepted. They held hands for 3 seconds before entering the seminar room. When I looked at the last photo, Lydia and Noah standing on Milwaukee snow, her hand resting where it used to be mine, my heart clenched painfully. Not because she drifted away, but because she had willingly stepped out of the marriage long before she said, I want a divorce. What I was seeing was not a moment of infidelity. It was a plan, calculated, prolonged, funded, organized, and I, the one who stayed silent, trusted, and built peace from what my parents left, had been placed in the position of an accidental sponsor. My phone rang. Marcus, his voice was controlled but carried a restrained anger underneath. Clara just sent me 7A good, very good. He paused a second as if picking his words. But to end this, we need something stronger than images. What? Digital, email, WhatsApp, transfer messages, something undeniable. I tightened my hold on the phone. Marcus lowered his voice, cold, sharp, strategic. Adrian, get ready. This is about to turn in another direction, and it will no longer be just about divorce. That night, Chicago was covered in a layer of dry, cold wind, strong enough that the apartment windows clicked softly every time a gust swept across. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Lydia holding Noah's hand in the Milwaukee snow flashed like a blinding streak in a dark room. Impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. I went back into the office. Lydia's old laptop was still in the drawer under the bookshelf, the one she said was broken and not used anymore. Back then I believed her. Now there was nothing left to believe. I turned it on. It started slowly, but still powered up. The old wallpaper was still there. The Lake Michigan shoreline at sunset, where we used to walk when we first married. I opened the Documents folder. Empty. Downloads. Empty. Desktop. Empty. But when I opened the System Logs folder, I saw a faint, almost hidden file. cloudsync.log. I clicked it. Lines of text scrolled, full of code and server paths, but one section made me sit upright. Upload to drive. Project Bloom. Transfer to Noah Reeve. Amount $17,500. I stared at that number. $17,500. Not for a retreat. Not for a workshop. Not for our life together. But for another man. I felt something inside me go hollow for a beat. I sent the log file to Clara immediately. Not even 3 minutes later, she called back. Good work, Adrian. I'll pull all data from this path. This will be Exhibit B. B because there's already an Exhibit A? Yes. A is the Milwaukee photos. Now we have the money. Her voice was steady, but at the end I heard something like pity, a feeling a professional investigator rarely allows to slip. That only proved one thing. What Lydia had done was too clear, too deliberate. Clara sent another message. Marcus is drafting the motion for you. Brace yourself. Marcus called right after. His voice was low, decisive. I'm preparing a pre-hearing motion for financial misconduct. She used marital assets to support someone else. That's dissipation. From now on, we strike first. I only managed to say, thank you. Those 2 words I had not said to him in nearly 6 years. Marcus exhaled, very quietly, but I heard it clearly. Adrian, this is about to get worse. Stay steady. Right after I hung up on Marcus, my phone vibrated. Clara sent an urgent message. Adrian, you need to see this. Attached was a video. I pressed play. The frame shook slightly because Clara was filming from the back seat of a parked car half a block away. The red neon glow of a motel sign reflected on the wet pavement, each letter shining as if written in blood. Maple Lodge Motel. Cash only. No ID required. Then I saw the familiar white SUV pull up in front of room number 17. The door opened. Lydia stepped out. The cream coat I picked for her on her 2023 birthday. The brown boots with the scratch I knew well because I had knelt to clean them after our Door County trip. She stood there, slightly turning her head, as if waiting for someone. And then the door of room number 17 swung open. Noah stepped out. Not hurried, not hiding, as if he had done this hundreds of times. He walked toward her. Naturally, he placed his hand on her back, exactly where I used to place mine every morning to help her down the steps when her back hurt in 2021. But Lydia did not pull away, did not flinch. She leaned into Noah as if that was where she belonged. Noah bent down and whispered something into her ear. Lydia smiled, a thin, soft smile, eyes slightly closed. The kind of smile she reserved only for someone close enough to hear her breath. My throat tightened. Then Noah lifted his hand and gently brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek, a gesture more intimate than any words. Lydia did not pull back. She even lifted her face in that exact way I knew well, the silent signal that she wanted more. And Noah understood. He leaned in. They kissed. Not a tentative kiss, not a rushed one, but a slow, deep, practiced kiss, the kind that only exists when two people have belonged to each other for a long time. When Noah pulled her closer, his hand slid down her back and stopped, in a place I never imagined another man would have the right to touch. Lydia wrapped her arms around his neck without a hint of hesitation. Every second in the video felt like a blade slicing through my chest. They pulled apart just enough to breathe. Lydia touched Noah's chest with her fingertip, a delicate gesture but far too intimate to ever pass as retreat or workshop. Noah opened the door. Lydia stepped inside first. If this were a verdict, then the moment she placed her hand on that doorframe was the final period on everything I had ever believed about this marriage. Noah followed, his hand still on her waist. The door closed, not fast, not harsh, but gently, as if closing over a secret that had existed for a very long time. And the moment the click sounded, the lock from the inside, I knew. This marriage did not begin falling apart the night she said, "I want a divorce." It had ended long ago. I was simply the last one to know. The silver Parker pen slipped from my hand and rolled onto the floor, making a sharp metal-on-wood sound in the silent room. Truth in silence. That was what my father engraved on the pen. But tonight, silence was no longer truth. Silence was only humiliation. Just when I thought I had reached the bottom of the pain, a new email lit up. Sender: Ellen Strauss, attorney at law. Subject: Notice of counterpetition. Financial manipulation and emotional coercion. I scrolled to the content. Lydia, the woman who had just walked into a motel room with Noah, was filing a counterpetition against me, claiming that I have been financially manipulated for the past 3 years. I laughed, a short, sharp laugh, as if my body reacted without asking my mind. The real storm had just begun. That morning I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop on the wooden table by the window. Chicago sunlight filtered through the blurry curtains, washing the room in a pale yellow haze. I had not even touched the phone when a message from a colleague lit up. "Have you seen the Chicago Post?" I opened the newspaper site. The headline sat there, bold, cold, and full of malice. Chicago lecturer accused of financial control over wife. Next to the title was a photo of me taken from the university website, my calm face placed beside the words, "Financial manipulation." No evidence, no proper citations, just a toxic piece stitched together at the exact moment the public was easiest to sway. In that moment, I finally understood why Marcus said Lydia wanted to destroy me, not just divorce me. My phone kept vibrating, friends asking, colleagues asking. Some people sent only one word, "You okay?" I closed the phone without replying. At noon, when I opened Instagram to check what my students were posting, Lydia's face appeared at the top of the feed, a video she uploaded to Reels, her voice full of emotion. There are women who stay silent in marriage for too long. I used to be one of them. Don't let anyone control your worth. Speak your worth. I sat down, frozen. She was turning this marriage into a social media campaign, where truth could be twisted into a personal weapon. Comments poured in. "You're so strong. Men like this are everywhere. Don't let him take everything." I didn't respond. I only felt the empty space in my chest widen. In the afternoon, Marcus called. "You saw the article?" "Yes." I sent a warning notice to the Chicago Post. Defamation could cost them more than they think. His voice, calm, razor-sharp, and cold, in the way only a lawyer familiar with media warfare could be. Do you want to respond publicly? No. Good. Silence is always louder than noise. Let them expose themselves. I knew he was right. In Illinois, any false statement harming career and reputation can become a defamation lawsuit. Marcus wasn't just defending, he was preparing to strike. In the evening, Clara reported new findings. Her voice was quick and sharp. I traced the withdrawal history from the secondary account. It wasn't only in Chicago or Milwaukee. Where else? There were a few seconds of silence before she answered, as if choosing the least damaging way to say it. Miami Beach. Miami? Yes. Noah Reeve received transfers from Lydia while he was at a beachfront hotel. The invoice clearly says, private suite, 2 guests. The words made the room so cold I had to inhale slowly. Lydia wasn't just betraying me, she was funding their vacation with my money. Clara sent another image, a photo of an ATM transaction near Collins Avenue Beach. The number blinked on the screen, $2,600. Cash withdrawal. Memo, for Bloom Project. I knew too well. Bloom wasn't a project. It was the name they gave their relationship. Marcus called again right after Clara sent the file. His voice was low, deep, and steady like an architect laying the first stone. Adrian, listen to me very carefully. I stayed silent. We are not just going to win. We are going to make them remember that silence is a weapon, if you use it at the right moment. In that sentence, I heard something that hadn't existed between Marcus and me for 6 years. Trust. That night, Chicago stood in a kind of artificial calm. But inside, I knew the real storm had already begun to form. That morning, the 6th-floor hallway of Cook County was so cold, my breath turned into smoke, and reporters lined both sides with microphones sticking up like a forest of stakes. I walked past them without answering a single question, with Marcus beside me holding his black briefcase with worn edges and eyes sharp like he was about to enter a legal dissection. Lydia arrived 17 minutes late wearing a white coat, dark red lipstick, and a walk that fit the wife controlled financially by her husband narrative she had been building for 3 weeks, and beside her was Ellen Strauss, the famously tough divorce attorney whose sharp heels struck the stone floor like she was preparing to hand down a sentence against me. Courtroom 6B was packed with a few faculty from my department, 2 Chicago Tribune reporters, and a group of curious UChicago students pressed into the back row. I sat at the petitioner's table without speaking, because I had learned that sometimes silence is the loudest noise. The judge entered, Strauss stood, and began with a rehearsed, flowing tone, describing me as controlling, freezing finances, and violating marital duties, while Lydia lowered her head at perfect timing, adding a few tears worthy of a Broadway stage. Marcus did not rush to counter and only said, Your Honor, we request to present the transactions in chronological order. The lights dimmed, the large screen turned on. First came the bank statements, with 8 transactions of $1,950 each month. Then the HELOC system Lydia had opened on her own. Then the Project Bloom file with its digital signature. The room buzzed, and Lydia shifted from surprise to irritated. Marcus looked at the judge and said, And here's the most important part, Your Honor. The first video appeared showing Lydia walking under Milwaukee snow, clear enough that I could almost hear her shoes grinding on ice, stopping at the entrance of the Mindhaven retreat cabins, holding a slightly crumpled brown envelope, whose open edge revealed neatly stacked bills, inside as captured by Clara's camera. And Noah appeared from the doorway, unhurried, hands in pockets, moving like someone far too familiar with this. Lydia handed him the envelope. He took it with one hand while pulling a small silver USB from his coat pocket, with the other and placing it in her palm, the two standing closer than necessary for any work collaboration, and as Lydia closed her fingers around the USB, she tilted her head toward Noah and her voice played through the speakers, clear and sharp. "He'll never find out." The sound sliced through the room like glass. No one breathed. A female lecturer covered her mouth. A student in the right row turned pale as he looked at his friend. Strauss stared at the screen with rapid blinking, the clearest sign of panic, and Lydia froze with her shoulders trembling just slightly, something I recognized after living with that tremble for 8 years. Strauss jumped up to fight back, saying, "Your Honor, this video does not prove infidelity or asset dissipation. It could be a personal workshop, it could—" But Marcus did not let her finish and clicked again. The second video appeared. Maple Lodge Motel. Cash only. No ID required. The camera filmed through a car windshield as the door of room number 17 opened, and Lydia entered the frame with Noah. Not a professional greeting, but Noah, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her close, his mouth near her jawline, and Lydia smiling, the smile I once believed was only for me, then kissing him. Not hurried, not hidden, but the kiss of someone already comfortable with wrongdoing. They walked into room number 17, Noah's hand pressing lightly on her back, and the door closed before the lights inside went dark. Courtroom 6B erupted in whispers. Strauss froze. Lydia turned pale, and the judge struck the gavel 3 times, commanding, "Silence immediately. If anyone continues making noise, I will clear the room." Marcus looked straight at Strauss and said softly, but loud enough for the room to hear, "I believe this evidence is clear enough." Then he placed before the judge a thick red-stamped folder titled Forensic Findings, Financial Misconduct and Marital Dissipation, Lydia Reeve. I said nothing, only took out my silver Parker pen engraved with Truth in Silence and signed the authenticity confirmation. Every camera turned toward me, and for the first time since everything began, I did not feel like the one on trial. I felt free. The judge paused for a few seconds before saying, "The court will continue this afternoon, but for now, this evidence speaks for itself." As I stood up, the entire room moved aside, leaving a wide path as if the truth had just cut straight through all the lies before it. 3 days after the hearing in courtroom 6B, Chicago seemed to change color as news spread faster than the wind along the river, and the name Lydia Reeve, once celebrated on social media through Speak Your Worth, turned into the center of sarcasm, reposts, and outrage, while I, the man who had been seen for 8 years as quiet and yielding, was suddenly looked at differently, with the eyes of people beginning to understand that silence can sometimes be a battle. At 6 in the morning, while I was making coffee in the kitchen with glass doors facing Lakeshore Drive, my phone vibrated with a message from Marcus saying, "Her accounts have been frozen. The investigation order is underway. Everything is beginning," followed by a photo of an email from First Midwest Bank, reading "Temporary asset freeze, suspicious transfers under investigation." And as I read it, I felt neither joy nor satisfaction, but something closer to watching a house you once loved burn, painful, calm, and strangely light. At 9, Clara sent a second message saying, "Noah is not in Milwaukee. There's a source saying he flew to Florida last night, Miami or Key Largo," along with a photo of his flight ticket showing his name clearly, and a betrayer who knows he has been exposed often runs fast. But running is not freedom. It is only another kind of chain. In the afternoon, Chicago sent an internal statement titled Statement on Respect, Truth, and Academic Integrity, saying, "The university stands with Professor Adrian Forsyth. The accusations circulating on social media have no basis, and the evidence presented in court shows the truth is entirely the opposite. The university does not tolerate financial manipulation or defamation intended to destroy the career of anyone." And below it was a long list of signatures from history students reading, "We stand with you, Professor." Truth won in silence. And as I read those lines quietly, for the first time in months, my heart felt less heavy. realizing some battles require no shouting, others will speak for you. That afternoon, Marcus stopped by my office, set his briefcase on the desk, leaned back, removed his glasses, and asked, "Are you all right?" And I answered, "I'm fine," even though fine was far too small for the earthquake inside me, and he nodded, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and said, "This is the stage most people misunderstand. They think justice is the moment the gavel falls. No, justice is what happens after the gavel. When you keep standing, keep teaching, and keep facing life without bowing, justice isn't applause. It's endurance." Then looked at me so deeply I had to look away before adding, "And you're doing well?" Which left me silent out of gratitude and because my throat tightened. That evening, as I prepared to lock my office door, the receptionist called, saying, "Someone wants to see you. She says, she's your ex-wife." And I froze, not out of hope, but because I never expected her to come so soon. When I went downstairs, Lydia was there with red eyes, smeared mascara, an unbuttoned coat, and wind-tangled hair, with none of the confidence or free woman aura she had used to avoid responsibility for months. As soon as she saw me, she burst into tears, not the manipulative kind, but the kind of someone realizing her life was burning from the inside out, saying, "Adrian, please, I was wrong. I got pulled into. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know it would go this far. I have nothing left. I'm being investigated. Noah, he ran. I have no one but you." With her voice breaking until her words turned into sobs, I stood still and let her finish, and when she looked up, I opened my briefcase, took out a white envelope, and placed it in her hand as she stared at me with tear-blurred eyes as if waiting for a miracle. I said, "This is the only thing you need?" And she opened it to find a document titled Mutual Release Agreement, with no expectations, no compensation, no reconciliation, and beneath it the sentence I had written with my father's Parker pen: "Forgiveness begins the day the lies end." I looked at her one last time, not with hatred and not with love, but simply as someone who once loved standing before someone who was once loved, understanding everything had, turned to ash and said, "Sign it, Lydia. This is the only way out of the fire you lit." And it ended there in the lobby of the East Chicago building, where the wind through the windows seemed to signal that the next battle would not belong to the heart, but to the truth. The night Lydia signed the mutual release, I thought everything had closed. But a person's wound does not close when a pen touches paper. It only closes when the truth is spoken, when two people sit down and face each other without shields, without blame, without anything left to cling to. And the next afternoon, I realized it was time for one final meeting. Marcus stood by the glass wall of the Cook County building when I arrived, the Chicago afternoon light falling along the river like a pale gold ribbon, and he only nodded without speaking, which told me today was no longer a legal battle, but the last battle of the heart. Lydia sat in the small meeting room on the third floor with no makeup, no heels, and no expensive coat, just an ordinary woman who looked smaller, more tired, and for the first time, real. She looked up when I walked in with no more crying, no more pleading, only the eyes of someone who had reached the bottom, and she said in a hoarse voice, "I have to say this. I didn't love Noah. I never loved him. I trusted him because he promised that Project Bloom would have real investment. He told me I could be independent, that I could leave the life I felt trapped in. He told me the things I wanted to hear. I was stupid, Adrian, stupid enough to believe it was a chance to become someone better." And I did not interrupt or judge, only sat and let her continue. "I didn't realize how empty I was," Lydia said with a bitter smile. "I chased retreats, empowerment promises, hollow people. I thought I was moving forward, but I was running from myself. I didn't try to hurt you. I just didn't know what I wanted anymore," she said while looking down at her hands locked together, and a long moment passed, long enough for me to hear courthouse employees walking outside and to see the dust floating in the afternoon light. I spoke slowly and clearly, without resentment. I used to think silence was cowardice, that I was quiet because I was afraid, weak, or making myself small. Then looked at her. But now I understand silence is a lesson. It taught me to see things clearly, to respond not with instinct but with truth. And the truth is, I cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. Lydia covered her face with her hand, and Marcus, leaning against the window, stayed silent with the afternoon light, casting a faint halo across his shoulder. I stood and placed my Parker pen on the table and said, I am not taking revenge. I do not want to repeat what happened. I just am ending it, not out of hate, not out of anger, but because it is the only right thing for both of us. And Lydia looked up, not with pleading eyes, but with the eyes of someone who finally understood and whispered, I'm sorry. Not for you to forgive me, but so I can forgive myself. And I nodded because it was the only apology I believed, and the only one I needed to leave that room with a heart no longer stained by the past. I turned to Marcus, and he said nothing, only placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, light enough to feel, but strong enough to tell me this chapter had closed. When I pushed the door and stepped into the hallway, my phone vibrated with a new email from Dean Harriet Moore of the University of Chicago, titled, We'd like you to speak at the Ethics Symposium. And I stood in the long hallway with the last light of the day spreading across the stone floor like a thin layer of gold, and I allowed myself a small smile, the first in months. Chicago at the end of October had the kind of cold that made a person breathe one extra beat, and that morning the sky had no sun or rain, only thin layers of mist hanging around glass buildings, like the breath of a city pausing to think about itself. Marcus and I met at the corner of a small cafe overlooking the frozen lake of Millennium Park, where the sound of children's skates echoed like an old melody we used to hear when we were young. Marcus arrived a few minutes late, wearing a dark wool coat and a scarf, but his eyes were lighter than at any time I had seen in the past 6 years, and he set down his cappuccino with steam rising into the fog. For a long moment we sat watching tourists take photos in front of Cloudgate without speaking. But this silence was different, not heavy and not awkward, the kind of silence between two people worn down by time, but finally returning to the right place. Marcus exhaled quietly and said, I used to be jealous because you chose peace, Adrian. And I turned to look at him, surprised, because Marcus rarely admitted weakness, and his confession fell like a stone into a still lake, sending slow ripples outward. He continued, You chose teaching, chose a small house, biking to work, reading the morning paper, sleeping on time. I dove into lawsuits, chased reputation, results, the feeling of needing to prove something. There were moments I thought I was stronger than you, and I gave a small smile and asked, And then you realized you were wrong? Marcus laughed softly while lowering his gaze into his cup as if it held an answer he had searched for many years, and said, Yes, when Lydia's case happened, I understood. Silence is not running away. It is discipline, the way to stand firm when everyone wants to pull you toward them. I rested my hand on the table and looked at the buildings reflected in the raindrops on the cafe window and said, I used to think I was weak because I stayed quiet, but these days I realize the truth does not need noise. It only needs us to stand long enough for everything to break into pieces in front of others. And Marcus nodded, slowly, and said, I'm proud of you, Adrian. And I turned away slightly, not to hide, but to keep the feeling from becoming too much. We had been two parallel roads that finally crossed where they should have long ago. After we sat a while, Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out an old stack of papers yellowed with age and asked, Do you remember this? And the first page read, Forsyth Family Fund, 2014, with my father's signature beneath it, and the cold in my hands softened immediately, as if memory melted and flowed to one place. Marcus said, I think we should restore it, but not as before. I want to change its purpose. And he placed a new draft in front of me. Silent Scholars Foundation, a scholarship for law and finance students from difficult backgrounds who maintain honesty and discipline in their work. And I read every line and every word. Silent Scholars, a scholarship of silence, a scholarship for people like me and in some way like Marcus. Though he never said it, I nodded slowly and said, "Do it. This is the best way to turn pain into something useful." And Marcus narrowed his eyes in the dim fall light and said, "You're right. We will not use this fund to remember loss. We will use it to rebuild." And the two of us lifted our cups and tapped them lightly with no celebration and no slogans, just two men understanding that life does not need noise to have meaning. When I stood to leave, my phone buzzed once with a short message from Clara. Noah was arrested in Miami, charges pending, and I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling partly relieved and partly peaceful, needing neither gloating nor final blows, because sometimes justice does not arrive with cheers. It arrives when those who ran finally have nowhere left to run. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket, and that day the wind in Millennium Park felt gentler, and I knew the story was approaching the moment where I could take a truly deep breath for the first time in many years. 1 year passed faster than I expected, and April in Chicago returned with that cool wind, sharp as a blade, yet carrying a quiet golden light I had always loved, the kind of light that belongs to beginnings, to things no longer clinging to you. The Truth in Modern Ethics Symposium took place in the large lecture hall of UChicago, with high wooden ceilings and glass walls overlooking the shimmering lake. Every seat filled by faculty, students, journalists, and representatives from different departments, not because of scandal or curiosity, but for one simple reason. They wanted to hear about the truth. I stood backstage adjusting my tie, and on the podium, the steel microphone glowed under the lights, and right before me on a small side table lay my father's silver Parker pen, the one that had never left my pocket through the stormy year behind me. I picked it up, turned it between my fingers, the faded engraving still readable. Truth in Silence. When he gave me the pen, I was too young to understand, but now I understood it down to the bone. When my name was called, the whole hall applauded, not the thundering applause of a stage, but a steady, gentle kind, like the agreement of people who had seen enough wrong to appreciate what was right. I stepped into the light and began my speech, not with philosophy or academia, but with a story I had lived myself. 1 year ago, I believed justice was a verdict, the day the judge struck the gavel, the moment the guilty were exposed. But the truth does not work that simply, I said, pausing to look at the third row where Marcus sat with his arms folded lightly, and an ease in his eyes I rarely saw, Clara beside him with her hair tied back, smiling when she caught my glance. I continued, Justice is not a verdict. Justice is the light that forces us to live honestly with ourselves. And the hall fell into a beautiful silence, the silence of understanding. I spoke about my silence, not as endurance, but as disciplined choice. Silence to see others clearly. Silence not to react from pain. Silence that allowed the truth to walk out on its own when the time came. I spoke about Lydia, not with bitterness or attack, but as a chapter completed. I spoke about Marcus, and how the two of us found each other again through chaos and growth. I spoke about Clara, who stood with us in the dark so we could find the light. At the end, I bowed slowly, and the applause rose warm and steady, not for me, but for the idea that truth does not need to shout to be heard. After the symposium, I returned to my office overlooking the city, where the buildings reflected the sunset like golden blades, and on the desk waited the stack of papers from the morning. Articles of incorporation, Forsyth Foundation for Financial Integrity, the new foundation, the new purpose, the new door. I placed my father's Parker pen down, the nib touching the page and sliding softly like a breath, my signature forming more firmly than ever in my life. and beneath the foundation seal was the line I had chosen, built with silence, given with grace. After signing, I stood and walked to the window, the city lights of Chicago spreading across the glass like tiny flames, flames of justice, not loud, not violent, only quiet, steady, and never extinguished. I placed my hand on the cold glass and whispered for myself alone, "Justice always has a light." This journey closed here, but that light had never ended. By the end of the journey, I realized something I never touched in 8 years of marriage. Justice is not something we wait for, it is something we become. I did not win because I spoke louder or because more people stood with me. I won because I stayed standing even when everything tried to pull me down. And if you have followed me to the very end, remember one thing. Few people hear the voice of truth during chaos, but everyone sees the light. When it turns on, I turned on my light, and you can too. If this story touched you even a little, leave it. So I know you still believe in justice. If you want to hear more real journeys of ordinary people who stand up in silence, subscribe to the channel so I can tell you the next stories. Stories of light, of truth, of people who seem the weakest, yet are the strongest. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end, and I will see you in the next journey where justice always finds its own light.